There is not enough quality educational material about religion on YouTube, so imagine how excited I was when I heard that Crash Course, the educational channel started by the YouTube celebrities John and Hank Green, was launching a series on world mythology, bringing academic discussions about cosmologies and pantheons and apocalypses to YouTube. I am a huge fan of Crash Course, and to be 100% honest, Religion for Breakfast was inspired by me watching Crash Course for hours. Moreover, last year, John and Hank Green awarded Religion for Breakfast a small grant to help me buy equipment to keep Religion for Breakfast going. However, I'm not going to let my fanboy perspective to stop me from critiquing a series that's in my expertise. I'm one of the few religious studies YouTubers on this platform, so I want to offer some thoughts and criticisms of Crash Course Mythology. So, Hank and John Green, if you're watching this video, I'm making this out of the utmost love and respect for your content. Please keep making educational content about religion. You have made some of the best videos out there on these topics. But here it goes. 2 things I liked and 2 things I did not like about Crash Course Mythology. 2 things I liked. Number 1, the show models how to talk about religion respectfully and from an academic perspective. In the first episode, the host, Mike Rugnetta, just comes out and says, we are studying myths as literature. We're not studying myths as claims to universal truth. And this is great. This is basic religious literacy 101. The audience needs to know the difference between studying a religious story from an academic perspective and studying a story from a theological claim to universal truth. Moreover, when they talk about Yahweh as a character in the Hebrew Bible, they are very careful to say, we are using this word character because we are studying this story as literature. We are not making a universal truth claim that God exists or doesn't exist. This is a pretty sophisticated way to talk about religion, and I want to say kudos to the writers of Crash Course to bring this perspective to the table. Number 2, I really liked that they have a cross-cultural perspective. Especially when you live in the United States, when you think of the word mythology, you immediately start thinking about Greek and Roman mythology. But Crash Course Mythology brings in myths from everywhere. Aztec myths, Japanese Shinto myths, myths from the Yoruba people in West Africa. It really is a cross-cultural perspective that helps us break out of our obsession with the Greeks and the Romans. Very much appreciated. But Crash Course Mythology is not perfect, and it really would have benefited from some input from religious studies scholars. So here are 2 things I didn't like. Number 1, the writers of the series lump myths into outdated, reductive categories that really no scholar of religion uses anymore. These are the archetypal god categories: mother goddesses, trickster goddesses, dying and rising gods. The problem with these categories is that they invent or exaggerate similarities between religions, trying to invent universal themes that tell us more about the scholar creating the categories than the actual culture where these myths came from. Okay, what do I mean by that? Crash Course Mythology seems to rely heavily on the perspectives of Joseph Campbell and Houston Smith, scholars who aimed to identify universal religious themes and myths shared across cultures and across time. But these shared themes like motherhood or trickster gods, these are relentlessly culturally contextual themes. We can learn a lot more about these cultures by studying how these themes differ between religions, not how they're similar. Different cultures interpret these themes differently. Motherhood means something different to an ancient Aztec as it does to a 21st century American. The idea of death, which is basically a universal human experience, is conceived of differently if you're on the Indian subcontinent compared to if you were raised in ancient Near East culture. Scholars like Russell McCutcheon have criticized the universalizing approaches of Campbell and Smith for ignoring cultural context and reducing complexity and diversity to simplicity and unity. Related to my first problem, Crash Course Mythology doesn't provide enough cultural context when they discuss these myths. By focusing on archetypal categories or monomyths, Crash Course Mythology misses an opportunity to explore how political and historical realities shaped these myths. For example, the religious studies YouTuber Lays Farah points out in his review that the episode on the creation myth of the Bushango Bantu people in Central Africa failed to mention how these stories were developed while these people were under European colonial rule. If you read the myth, the creator deity Bumba is described as having white skin. The author Crash Course Mythology heavily relies on writes in his book The World of Myth, the fact that Bumba is white suggests that this is a late myth, affected like so much African mythology by the presence of the white race in colonial Africa. Check out Farah's review here for a full discussion. Crash Course Mythology glosses over this fact and misses a huge opportunity to explore how myths are embedded in their cultural context and how myths change over time depending on the contemporary political situation. Despite these shortcomings, I really do think Crash Course Mythology is a net positive step in the right direction when it comes to educating the public about religion. Not only does the series model how to talk about religion from an academic perspective, this series could also spark interest in people studying more about religious studies. Having said that, I do think the series could have benefited from more input from religious studies scholars instead of literature scholars. They really would have been able to help steer the writers away from these outdated reductive categories, but I do understand that a world mythologies series might have different goals than a religious studies series, which is much more interested in cultural context. Having said that, I invite everyone to go check out Crash Course Mythology. Let me know if my criticisms actually hold water or if I'm just, getting upset over nothing. And really go check out Farah's review of Crash Course Mythology. It's about 40 minutes long and extremely detailed. As always, thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.